kids medically transition? Well, let's find out as I react to Jubilee's new video, Should Minors Transition? Undecided Teens Must Choose, and this is in a new format, so looking forward to that. Hello everyone, it is Jack. I am back for another video, and I am so glad to have you with me. I am in Greece, having a great time. I'm in Rhodes, a small island off Greece. It's glorious, still a great time to travel here in October, and I would highly recommend it. And in other news, I have cut my hair. Big decision, but you know, my hair's been long for quite a long time and I was just feeling a change. So kind of look like a prisoner, but it feels amazing. Let me know what you think. Do I look older or younger? Just a quick thank you to everyone who subscribed recently. I really appreciate it. We are almost at 1,000 subscribers, so pleased about that. Thanks for joining my journey. Please let me know what you'd like to see soon. And if you're new here, what are you doing? Please subscribe, comment down below, like this video, and let's get into it.
Today we're bringing a new version of Middle Ground. We'll be exploring the topic, should minors be allowed to medically transition? We'll be introducing an undecided group, and they'll be listening to a discussion between liberals and conservatives, and the undecided group will pick a side after each prompt.
Love the idea. Let's see how it goes. Sarah Higdon is in this, who was in our Jubilee Trans Liberals versus Conservatives. I actually heard that she filmed it on the same day, which is rough. Hopefully this one isn't as heated, although it would make good entertainment.
Transitioning has become a social media trend.
Absolutely agree. I mean, it is just skyrocketing, the amount of children that you see falling into this.
Absolutely not. People said the same thing about people coming out being lesbian, gay, or bisexual as it got more normalized.
Totally untrue. There were all the straight guys coming out as gay and then saying, oh, it was just a trend. I mean,
where are they?
With straight men, when I grew up, they were very much the antithesis to that. You're very scared of being perceived as gay, and they found it quite insulting. I think from a homophobic place, but I think still, you know, a lot of straight men are secure in their masculinity and they don't really like the idea of someone thinking they're gay, which is absolutely fine with me. I think that's totally unfounded, and just on this topic, I would agree with this.
I think you're falling prey to the survivorship bias, which is just sort of, you're overlooking all of the cases of people who either weren't able to come out because they weren't comfortable or safe to do so, or they either died due to suicide or other mental health reasons.
Oh God. It's really hard to argue with this suicide claim because it sounds really disrespectful, but it is not true. Totally not true. So the risk of suicide in transgender people is actually comparative to the risk we see in other people with mental health disorders, especially in kid situations. So as kids presenting with anxiety, body dysmorphia, depression, etc., still remains to be said, but you know, in the UK, they did a study on this, and for transgender kids, the rate was 13 per 100,000. And then in cisgender kids, I'll put the screenshot up here, but there's not a huge amount of difference there. Something that we're all not talking about is the male loneliness epidemic, and the suicide rate is highest in men. I've also heard the suicide rate is no higher in gay people than it is in trans people. So I'm sick of them using that excuse, and it's a huge assumption to make that, oh, people in the past that weren't able to come out as trans either died. That is such a stretch. I think humans are resilient. Suicide is a very tragic thing, but it is rare. And for the most part, we are conditioned to want to survive. So I really don't think that's true.
Simply because legislation is being passed across the country that is banning minors from being able to transition, that automatically means that those children would commit suicide. And that is simply an abusive statement in of itself.
Statistically, a lot of minors who aren't able to transition, who would like to, do end up.
No. He's getting that number from activist charities that release data based off surveys. So they will say 50% have considered killing themselves. Now, I'm not saying that's 100% untrue, even though I highly suspect it is. Because when you do a survey, it's opt-in, people decide to do it. And the thing about this environment we have is all of these trans people feel under attack, and the gender affirming care is going to be taken away, especially for minors. Those of them are fighting for this. So naturally, if you were in that vulnerable defensive position, then it would be advantageous to say, yes, seriously considered killing myself. There's a big difference between suicidal ideation and actually carrying it out. I can only speak from my experience, but when I was going through all of my crazy health issues with chronic pain and stuff, I got to such low moments that I would ideate on it and be like, wow, my life would be so much easier if, But there was a huge leap between that and me actually carrying it out. I never felt close to the point of carrying it out. And I think it's easy for someone to just fill out a form and say like, oh, yep, not put a lot of thought into it. And I also see a lot of trans people say, if I hadn't received it, like I probably would have killed myself. Again, probably would have, not delegitimizing it, but I think the narrative is sort of appropriating suicide. Social media trend, when you are online in forums talking about wanting to transition, they're all saying, oh, well, people are killing themselves if we don't get it. So naturally, if I'm a kid and I'm 12 years old, then I will think, oh my God, if I don't get this, I might kill myself, or regurgitate the self-fulfilling prophecy of that to your parents because that's what everyone is telling you. Now, there are cases of kids who do it, but I just mean we can acknowledge both.
You look at members of each generation that identify as LGBTQ or in that community, it's like less than 2%. And then for some reason, as soon as we get to Generation Z, it's 20%. Now, some of you may argue, okay, this is just because it's more open, it's more accepting now, everyone, it's okay to be that. But then in the same beat, you guys will say that if you don't accept them, they're more likely to commit suicide or something. But it kind of sounds like a double-edged sword.
It is hypocritical. We're at the best place in time, and no one has been discussing suicide risk more in trans people. Mental health as a whole has gone down. Social media, comparing yourself, technology, anxiety, it's not only because of this wave, but with all these people, straight people can just be like, I'm non-binary, and then they're trans.
A study this year, published in Denmark, 2023, 42-year longitudinal study, and what they found is that the mental health issues did not decline, they actually were augmented. It was worse for individuals who thought that by transitioning they would solve their mental health issues. It actually got worse. It doesn't help, it doesn't solve these issues. It shows it's a contagion. That is the key word.
I'm glad someone's bringing in some data. And so I think it is the case that obviously some kids think this is the solution to my mental health struggles, and then they transition and actually it's not the solution and there's still lots of stuff going on. So I don't think that we should disacknowledge that, but it's so complicated with these kids. It's a roll of the dice, and I think for that reason they need to wait.
Let's go over to the undecided group.
Music is so like, ooh.
You guys are kind of like the comment section. Which side did you resonate with most? Liberals
already
or
young.
conservatives?
Oh, here we go. Moment of truth. The divide. The seas part.
So why did you resonate most with the liberal group?
So calling it a trend is saying that these people's identities are just going to go away. And I don't think that's fair.
I mean, we're very much still in the trend. That's the thing. Trends can go on for, emos and goths, that went on for a very long time. And identity, like you can identify as a Christian and then be an ex-convert. So identities also change. Some identities persist. I identify as gay, that's never going away.
Why do you think that it's not transphobic to misgender?
The concept of misgendering is false. There are two sexes. There's male and female. Born a male, he will remain a male. It doesn't matter how many chemicals he puts into his body or how many body parts are cut off. Telling the truth is not a mental illness.
Don't think he's helping himself, to be honest, because as soon as he starts that behavior, they're going to say you're transphobic and they're not going to take him seriously. Now, this is how I see it. So while he's not incorrect, I think for someone who is trans and then they need to transition and it works for them, they are obviously, first of all, they're presenting as that sex. So it would be so weird for me to call one of these trans people by the wrong pronoun because they look entirely female and male, very convincing. And also, I appreciate that these people go through a lot with gender dysphoria. And I think that it is respectful and a courtesy to call them by the correct pronoun. Now, when it gets into the complex issues like women's spaces, prisons, that's a different talking point, and sex still matters, in my opinion. I don't feel the same way for all the genderqueer, non-binary stuff. I don't think that that is motivated by gender dysphoria. I think it is a political thing and a cry for attention, among many other things. So I don't respect that, and I would use the pronoun simply because I would be afraid that I would end up in a massive debate with certain circles that I'm in. But that's the only reason, really. So I don't think he's helping his cause, and it is quite mean to the people who are sat opposite him.
So you sat more on the conservative side. Do you want to explain why you decided to come here?
I mean, it is just factual that there are more people transitioning or at least coming out, not even just as transgender, but just, within the LGBTQ community as a whole. I think for me, it does become a little bit grayer when you start to say, okay, is that because people are being influenced to transition, or is it because it's more accepting and people are feeling more open and safe about coming out? I've seen recently, a rise in people identifying with genders that aren't necessarily within a binary. Would you say that's a rise? How would you, I guess, account for that? I think, as I said earlier, that is just accounted by survivorship bias. People previously were not comfortable enough with coming out, and that's where that difference comes from. And eventually, that skyrocketing rate will even out.
It's such a sweeping statement. Oh, there's all these non-binary people because of survivor bias, and they weren't able to come out. Honestly, 1950s, the majority of people were very content to live in the binary and to admit that there are differences between men and women, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, sexism, I condone that. We're all equal, but gender is not socially constructed. And that's BS. I think I can kind of understand the male to female, female to male idea that, in the past they couldn't feel accepted. But why can't it be both?
Why can't it be both?
I'm not denying there are 100% people who now feel more accepted and safe to come out as trans, and now they have happy lives. But then, is it just a coincidence that all of these trans people on TikTok have green and blue hair, are a lot of the time very overweight, a lot of the time have comorbid mental health issues like ADHD, autism, OCD, anxiety, depression? Then, but all of those things are one thing, but then the trans thing is just standing on its own. I totally reject that. We have stories coming out constantly, anecdotal stories. How can we deny those people's experiences? And I just want to show you one here. So this was published in the Telegraph on the 12th of October, titled, "I supported the trans community unquestionably until my sister wanted to become a boy." So this person says, around the age of 12 or 13, things started going downhill for my sister. She struggled to fit in at school. She had never been happy with her appearance, tall, broad-shouldered, well-built, and towards the end of primary school, she was bullied quite badly for it. Clearly going through a lot. What we did know is that the change in her physical appearance as she sort of started presenting as male correlated with a deterioration in her mental health. She started to refuse to go to school. She started self-harming. I was desperately worried for her, so were my parents, and she was now receiving counseling at child and adolescent mental health services. We went into COVID lockdown. She became glued to her iPad and iPhone, spending hours a day on her own. She was 15. What she was actually doing was immersing herself in online transgender culture. She became obsessed with trans influencers, adapting her personality to imitate them. I didn't realize what was going on until that August when she sent our mum a message, "I've known since I was born that I am in the wrong body." She hated her body, she wanted puberty blockers and to undergo top surgery. Her family first rejected it, and she said, "If you don't affirm my identity, I'll kill myself." There was something weirdly robotic about it, as if she had been indoctrinated and was following a script. See? Self-fulfilling prophecy. They didn't let her transition. She got more mental health support, and then she says, "Finally last year we learned what was really going on. My sister, then by age 17, was diagnosed with autism and ADHD. Her feelings of discomfort within her own body turned out not to be because she was actually a boy, but because of sensory issues that are common among those on the spectrum. A feeling of overstimulation brought on by her changing shape as she went through puberty. I used to think I was trans," said my sister. "Now I realize it was my ADHD and autism."
There you go.
I know that it's an anecdote, but example A. Let's go to the next prompt.
Gender dysphoria is a mental illness.
It is a break with
Yes.
reality. I'll start at where I've said before. There are two sexes. It's determined not just by external characteristics, but by chromosomes. It's a mental issue, and you want to treat it that way. You treat it with counseling, with therapy, reflecting reality, helping the person to be comfortable with the sex that they're born with.
I don't think there's a reason to transition if you don't have a mental illness. There's something wrong in
That's
your
like
brain.
saying you shouldn't cut your hair because you don't
No.
want long hair.
Wow, that is so not a comparison.
So when you
Stay on topic.
I mean when it's the opposite concept of gender or body dysmorphia. So when you look in the mirror and you see what's wrong with, you have an uncomfortability with your secondary sex characteristics, and so the treatment is to change that to match with what you want it to be. But I mean, he's right. You can't change your sex. I don't think we should stigmatize mental illness. That's the whole point. Is calling it for what it is just accepting that, and it actually helps with treatment into what you're treating, because you're treating the brain. You have to go to a therapist. You have to go.
Yes, exactly. So why can we not acknowledge it as a mental disorder and destigmatize that? And it further legitimizes the fact that we can pathologize gender dysphoria And then one of the routes to solve that may be medical transition. You don't medicalize something because it's a preference. He said, oh, it's like cutting your hair.
No, it's not.
Pumping your body with hormones, testosterone blockers, and cutting off parts of your body, permanent effects, that is not the same thing as cutting your hair. Your hair grows back. It's a preference. Just like my hair will grow back. Make it come back, everyone. Really hard to get this straight.
Homosexuality actually used to be considered as a mental illness. Do you think there's any correlation here with what's going on currently with the trans movement?
I don't see them as the same thing. In order for me to live my life happily as a gay man, I don't need medical care. I don't need pills. I don't need injections. All I needed was for it to be legal and for people not to be able to, attack me and for people to leave me alone. I live a very happy life as a gay man and I did not need any medical interventions. Feeling like you need to change your body to be the opposite sex, what else do we call that? And I think there is nothing wrong with that. We should not judge people who go through that. We should have so much compassion for them, but
it has to do with your secondary sex characteristics that you're presenting to society. In a lot of regards, and even Deborah So wrote this in End of Gender, she actually advocated for this because the same hormone imbalance in the womb that causes more, femininity and homosexuality seems to be very similarly tied to gender dysphoria as well. It's just it's a further step along the way. It's a further, condition. I use mental illness and mental health condition synonymously, essentially.
Yes, I have that magical uterus. My third child came out at 11 and told us that he was a boy. He was assigned female at birth. And so he socially transitioned, obviously, because he was only 11. He is now an 18-year-old college university student and thriving. And then my youngest child came out as a trans girl at the age of 15. So I live this with my children.
what are the odds that both of your kids are trans? That is exceptionally rare. Exceptionally, who knows, once in a blue moon, but I can only guess this is a very liberal parent. I'm not taking away from either of their experiences. And I don't know how I feel about social transition because what I've heard is that when a kid socially transitions, it may seem harmless, but it does set them on a path, especially when they get loads of validation and praise and everyone loves them for it. And you're so brave and you're still working so much out as a kid. You may not be well into your 20s before you realize, oh God, this may have been a mistake. That's why all of these people saying, oh, they're 18 and they're so happy. That's still not early enough to know that it's the right decision. These things for children, your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed till you're 25. These things take a long time to understand. And when a kid socially transitions, because of all of that gratification and praise, it can be really hard for them to go back on that decision. It's embarrassing. They're in school. I would be mortified. And this mother just saying,
oh yeah, both my kids are trans is great.
I think that is a massive red flag. Just saying.
I made the trek to the emergency room, a suicide attempt and a suicide plan with each of my children. My opinion hasn't changed. It's a mental health condition, but antidepressants weren't working. Before Mitchell came out, we tried everything. We'd been to every single therapist and nothing was touching it until we used he, him pronouns.
So it's not a mental illness or a mental disorder, but it's a mental health condition. What's the difference? I feel like these people are just saying, oh yeah, I prefer not to call it that, but let's call a spade a spade. They will just disagree on everything just because of that stigma. Antidepressants didn't work because they have gender dysphoria. That's not the treatment for them.
I don't even know where to start here. It's like sex, again, sex is not assigned at birth, it's established at conception. We have to get to biology here. We're seeing like this move, you were mentioning the academic setting. Notice how the academic terms are changing, but this is a result of pressure. This is a result of societal pressure. That's what happened with homosexuality, by the way. Homosexuality was recognized as unhealthy behaviors. Now, whether you call it a mental illness or a deviant behavior or destructive behavior, that's a point of debate. It's an unhealthy behavior for sure, and certainly it's the case with transgenderism. Somebody cutting off healthy body parts. We have seen numerous detransitioners now coming forward. They had severe health and mental problems like the ones that you've talked about.
I don't like this guy.
Obviously because he's offensive for me.
Where did they find him? I feel like they should have picked someone a bit more moderate because you have a guy coming in who refuses to call the trans people by their gender pronoun. And then he's also saying that homosexuality is a deviant and unhealthy behavior. No one's going to listen to him. He's already lost all the points in this debate. they're not going to take him seriously. Talking about medical transition for kids and like wanting to make sure we spot the right people for it, it's not the one size fits all solution, is one thing. Coming in there and saying that homosexuality is unhealthy is totally ridiculous. I hate when people talk about their experience because they're so obsessed with themselves, but I'm so happy living as a gay man, and I feel lucky to live in a time where that is accepted. I have many friends who love being gay and they wouldn't change it. I'm in such a happy relationship, so this guy needs to go. I think he raises some valid points, like the detransitioners, totally. They're getting lost in the midst of like homophobia and transphobia in this case, and I don't think that's helpful. You know, they have 2 trans people, but they should have brought a detrans person on. We need that perspective because that person could have easily spoke on this and talked about the mental illness comorbidities, the trend online. I really feel like that would have been so helpful. So next time, why don't you swap the
homophobic priest over here
for a detransitioner?
Why did you choose the liberal side?
I do think it's a mental health condition. I don't like calling it an illness. Everyone has things they don't like about their bodies. I don't think we're calling everyone mentally ill.
It is a medical condition. I don't like calling it an illness.
I don't care what you like.
Someone has depression, you don't say, you know, it's a condition, I don't like calling it depression. No. Appendicitis is pathologized. If someone doesn't like to call it appendicitis, it doesn't matter, it is. I think what these people are showing is that they actually are not ready to embrace mental health difficulties and say that there's nothing wrong with someone who has mental health difficulties and we can help you.
What changed and what argument spoke to you most?
To my knowledge, the American Psychological Association still categorizes gender dysphoria as a mental illness. So just to stay on the side of facts, and at this time what the experts are categorizing as, I'm going to obviously side with that side.
Yes, absolutely. So it's just objective fact. Why is this such an argument?
The medical community is pushing gender transitions for financial gain.
I disagree.
Of course you do. This is just the same as the trans liberals versus conservatives debate. Why can't they find people from both sides that actually have nuanced views? And it's the same. Conservatives, the red people here, we're seeing this trend of conservative people approach situations with fact, except for this homophobic guy. But largely they're talking about studies, statistics, they're talking about the many. And then the liberals, all they want to talk about is, well, my experience, you know, it took me ages to transition, there was loads of bureaucracy. I do not reject that. I believe it. But they're always bringing things back to themselves, instead of just saying, well, you know, mine was lengthy, but I have heard of other stories of people being given puberty blockers after one appointment. And no one can argue with that.
Yeah, it was really interesting because we all didn't know anything about being transgender.
Yeah.
None of us.
Yeah.
And so we went to a gender clinic for guidance on what to do.
Right.
And I immediately from that day fast-tracked my transition. Like, and that's what a lot of people don't know is really going on. It's not just kids starting a transition. I walked in there and they reinforced to me and my family that I had to do everything as young as possible. I had one appointment with a social worker and we had talked about like my childhood, which things had happened. It happens to most trans people, honestly.
Sure.
There's a lot of things that go on.
Yeah.
But it was quite affirming. Like it was definitely, I knew that I was going to start transitioning.
Yeah.
It felt more just like, oh, we kind of have to do this.
When I started going through my process of transitioning, I didn't feel pushed by any medical professional at all.
See?
There were, in fact, quite the opposite.
When
a lot of
I
hurdles
started my transition.
and just like bureaucratic red tape sections I had to like work through. But it's not something that I think, in my experience, was pushed onto me at least.
When I started my transition, it took over a year just for me to get to my third doctor's appointment for us to actually like talk and evaluate things. And as far as cost goes, my insurance covered everything.
But they are still getting paid. Just the government or somebody else is paying them. I actually think there's 3 different types of doctors. I think that there are people that are going out there and doing it for financial gain. We saw it in Vanderbilt. We saw it in so many other instances where they are doing it. We also see that they are manipulating the system. That's why we have a lot of detransitioners right now, and that's why we're seeing that community grow, is because they're manipulating patients, they're manipulating parents. The third is, I don't know if it's ineptitude or if it's incompetence or laziness. But I think that there is a section, there's a group of mental health providers who simply right now, we want to cure everything with a pill.
Based.
Balanced.
He's able to say, there are doctors who are doing it for the right reasons, and there are doctors who are not. And then the other people, it's just deny anything which does not help our cause.
I don't understand.
I don't get it.
Community, but we see this in the SSRI community. We see this, everybody's being put onto something, and we're not really treating the root causes. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing a high comorbidity of like autism in the community. A lot of people that have autism are getting sucked into this, and they're not being treated for the autism, they're treating for gender dysphoria.
I need to point out, Big Pharma makes big money off of butchering little boys and girls. There is big money to be made in this. Follow the money. Ted Hidako, he's a father who's been fighting very hard because he's in a fraught divorce. His son was being put through the transition. He saw on his medical bills $200,000.
Oh, this guy, I can't stand him. So again, don't disagree with his points, because it is ridiculous that parents can lose their kids because they disagree on this and don't affirm the gender. But when you use language as doctors are butchering kids, not helpful. The people who think kids should transition are just getting insulted. And I think there are kinder words to use, like medical malpractice. He's not winning anyone over to his side.
It was a long process for you. That's not what we're hearing from detransitioners and a lot of these patients, and that's not what the St. Louis whistleblower said. She said they were basically pencil whipping psychologist letters so that they could start Myers on transition, and that's one of the reasons why I think that that clinic is also closing.
I mean, once again, for me, I'm always going to go on personal experience before I go on stats, because there are too many trans people specifically who don't get accounted into those statistics.
Why are you on this debate?
You're supposed to be talking about all children, not yourself. Where do they find these ideologues? Are there some liberals out there who actually have this view, balanced view? There's so many trans people who agree with this.
Oh, well, I'm just going to go off my experience.
No, get out of here.
Let's hear about what kind of resonated with you more to switch sides this time.
I'm sure and confident that there are practitioners out there who are pushing people to transition, who are just signing off on prescriptions, because yes, I mean, like the points were made, that there is money to be made, of course.
Then why are you on that side? What they say, they're like, oh, I acknowledge that there's medical malpractice, but I disagree.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you might want to ask that may potentially maybe even sway you to the other side, or just something maybe that you're not considering?
My cousin is trans, and he is so important to me, and so saying that it's a mental illness, saying that it's pushing when you can see that so many trans people of color are being denied treatment.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting so frustrated. Is there medical malpractice? Well, my cousin is trans and I care about them so much, so no. And what is this, like, trans people of color being denied care? Utter BS. Classic. So we don't talk about facts, statistics, the population. Instead, we talk about
my cousin and race.
Do I need to say any more?
I would be disrespecting someone very close to me if I was over there and saying that it's a mental illness, and then
she'd be disrespecting someone very close to her. I don't care. You shouldn't care. You should want for there to be stringent and thorough medical practice so that people like your cousin can be identified correctly and get the best standard of care.
Schools should include trans conversation in sex ed.
An age-appropriate time, I agree, yes.
What is that age appropriate?
I think by grades 3 or 4, they understand.
So what is that, like around 8, 9, or?
I don't know anymore.
Until they're old enough, around the grade of 3 or 4, how old is that?
I don't know.
Sounds about right. 8 years old? Absolutely not. Until kids reach puberty and they start getting sexual attraction, at the very least, we should not introduce this. It is too complicated for someone who's 8 years old to be asked, what are your pronouns? Oh, I notice you like the color pink and you have a doll, so...
Do you still identify as a boy?
So confusing. So confusing. You are planting things in their head. And also, when it comes to sex ed, I don't know if they're going to say this, but reproduction, yes. Gay sex, yes, agree with that. When people are at puberty, or just before puberty. Telling people what transition is, sure. Gender ideology,
no.
That's not science. And then the liberals are like, it's science. But that's not science. It's not a space for ideology.
But that sounds about right. I think 8 or 9 years old is a good time because gender is a concept that is formed in the mind of a child around the age.
I remember when I was younger, one of my cousins who was like 5, 6, I had this jumper that had Simba from The Lion King on it. Love The Lion Kings. And she said, when I'm a boy, can I have a jumper like that? My aunt said, you won't become a boy, or they just kind of laughed it off. Now they would say, what do you mean? Are you feeling dysphoric?
Should we go see a gender clinic?
I think it would be great to introduce the difference between gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation, because that is 3 completely different realms.
Gender expression, sure, but we don't really need to teach it. Kids don't need to understand those terms. We just say to them, if you're a boy or a girl, it doesn't matter. You should be free to wear what you want. But even that, shouldn't it be the parents' decision to kind of decide what their children can wear, instead of having a teacher to say, if you're a boy, you can wear a dress? These things don't need to be pushed on them. And when you're 8 years old, telling someone you have a gender identity, I didn't even know what the word identity meant when I was 8. Kids are not designed to become that introspective. This is why so many kids get through tough situations. Their mental health issues don't come to fruition until they're an adult, because kids have a defense mechanism to get them through life. And when you constantly ask a kid, look inside, that's not a good recipe. They grow up with anxiety. They are so self-aware. Kids need to be focused on the outside. On the outside.
Yeah, I definitely disagree. I think especially what they're proposing right now, a lot of the mainstream sort of education on sex ed is pretty like vulgar. You're looking at a couple like books, you see a lot of parents going out to like city committee meetings and they're reading books in front of like the school committee, and the school has to like stop the entire thing because they're reading such vulgar stuff.
So I don't agree with him, because I am aware of these books and I also don't believe they're appropriate, but a lot of the ones mentioned include books about homosexuality where they discuss explicit topics like grindr and fetishes, and those were in schools and people have been outraged that they've been taken out. I've not heard any that are explicit about transness, so I don't think he's making a good point there.
I agree in that. I really think it is the it's parents' responsibility.
The schools are supposed to pick up where the parents fall off. That's the whole point of sending your children to school.
No, your parents have the right to make the decision for you.
Okay.
School is a place for learning. It's because your parents they haven't trained to be a teacher. It's not a place for teachers to step in and be a parent if your parent isn't parenting. Sure, if a kid is being neglected, then a teacher can report it, but they don't take it upon themselves to say,
I'm gonna now parent this kid.
Sure, I mean, schools can set certain standards, but no.
That is a very US way of thinking, is that parental rights trump everything else, because there's a Convention of Children's Rights worldwide, and the US is the only country who hasn't signed on to it. So children in other countries have rights before their parents do.
No, in the sense of communism and socialism where the state gets to make decisions instead of the parents, that's not a good thing. I just want one of these liberals to have a balanced view. Just one of them to say, yeah, you know what, I acknowledge that.
Where do they find these people?
Can I go on this?
I think we have all undecided here. Let's start with you.
Well, I would just like to mention that I actually work in childcare and I work with children. And so as much as I think that we should have comprehensive sex education, I think that 5 years old is a bit young. I don't think that parents should have completely all the say, because if that parent is more on one side or the other, then they are going to push their child to do what they want them to do, and that child should be able to make that decision for themselves.
Disagree. It's up to parents how they raise their kids. That's why some kids are raised religious. Your parents' prerogative to do that. Sure, the child can disagree, and maybe the parents will be fine with that, or when they're old enough, they can decide. But kids, I mean, if we let kids make all their own decisions, they would eat nothing but ice cream all day. It's a parent's role is there to guide your kid in the right direction and to recognize that you're not old enough to make these independent decisions. They can ask you, would you prefer ice cream or chocolate? They don't just say, okay, well, what do you want to eat this week? Plan your meals every day. Not the same, but I'm glad that she stayed in the middle. I think whoever argued that it should be 5 years old is demented. I feel like these liberal people are just coming from a very selfish place, and we see the same thing with the queer movement and the trans story hour and everything. There's this push for people who identify as queer to want this queer utopia, queer anarchy. And the easiest way you change society is by starting with the kids. And they're saying, oh, we want to read stories to 3-year-olds. Like,
Why?
why is that adding value? I mean, to see this man in a wig and boobs and an ass and loads of makeup, they're doing it because they want to manipulate and change the younger generation so that when those kids grow up, we have this like queer majority. I just think it's super weird. It just kind of disturbs me.
I think there is kind of, for me, at the center of it is that conflict between, you know, parents that don't want specific things to be talked about and then parents who just don't care at all. But at least knowing that the conversation's going on and maybe signing off on that. I know we've seen that in the past with, you know, like taking the slips home. And
I think that signing off is a good idea. I'm just unsure how I feel about all this because gender dysphoria and being trans is a mental disorder. We don't teach kids about all of these other mental disorders or physical illnesses. I just don't know. I just think it's too ideological. Maybe this is me coming from a biased place, but a child understanding that sometimes 2 men fall in love or 2 women fall in love is one thing. But them understanding that some people have a gender identity and identify with the opposite sex, and then they go through hormones, and that's just a lot wider. It's a lot harder to wrap your head around. And the thing is, if someone does fall privy to a social contagion of being gay, which I don't think is as common at all, all they do is they might kiss a boy, or the worst case scenario, have sex with a boy and then say, okay,
That wasn't for me.
but there's no harm done. That's the problem.
Part of my issue, I think, with the idea of like having it mandatory at certain ages is that some kids, and this is why I do think parents should have the right to pull their kids out, because I think some parents are, like the really involved parents do know what their kids are ready for and what they aren't. Some kids are not quite ready for those conversations. I think one thing that I heard that was a little concerning to me on the liberal side and kind of kept me here was I did hear someone, I think, say something about parents of other cultures not being willing to, and I've lived in 5 countries. I've lived in 2 Muslim majority countries. I've lived in a Hindu, technically should be secular, but Hindu majority country, and I've lived in a Catholic country. And I think the Western mindset and how we approach issues, and we have to understand, like, when you're coming out of the country and you're bringing your children into a new culture as an immigrant, you want to keep your values at home, right? And there's things that you're going to be concerned about and nervous about, partially because of like religious affiliation maybe, or just not experiencing it. And so if schools want those conversations to happen, the focus needs to not be going directly to the children, but it needs to be going to the parents. It needs to be prioritizing assimilating the parents into the culture so they are aware how to have the conversations with their kids at home. Because what ultimately happens is if the child is learning something at school and they feel like they can't go home to their parents, and the parents find out about it in a way that's not, you know, congruent or whatever, this creates a distrust from those parents with the school system. And, you know, I mean, that just brings chaos to America. That's a very serious issue.
Wow, I love her.
Yes.
I've got to say that these 3, are they kids or young adults, adolescents, are very intelligent, well-spoken. I think they come across more nuanced, more thoughtful, more objective than these 3 adult liberals that they probably pulled off the street. Maybe the girl on the far right is a little bit biased because of her cousin, and I don't think that's helpful. But overall, I'm super impressed with the 3 of them.
Minors are capable of making life-altering decisions.
No.
Minors aren't able to make decisions whether to join the military, get married, or make tattoos. And so when you're talking about something that's super important, like sex, gender, whatever you want to call it, there's no reason we should be chopping up kids, putting a bunch of hormones in them that are super dangerous that we don't quite know the effects of. And
I feel like he didn't get the memo that you were supposed to wear red. He's like in this maroon top. That's not red, but I do agree with him.
you can do what you want, but why mess with the kids?
When you say that we don't know the effects of these chemicals and these drugs and all that, it's worth mentioning that these medicines that are used were first introduced to be used to treat cis people for various things.
Sometimes like a point needs to be made and I want someone to make it, because you cannot say that an adult takes a medication for menopause
And then say, oh, well, it's fine for a 10-year-old to take it.
That's not the same thing. We even have medications that work better on men than women, or women on men. So you mean to tell me that if a medication works on like 50-year-old, 60-year-old, that we just automatically give it to kids? There are antidepressants that you cannot prescribe to elderly people because they have a higher risk of heart issues. There are antidepressants that are not suitable for children because of the side effects and the way it can affect their growth. Now, they can be given to adults. So it's like they either don't do their research or they just choose to have these biased arguments.
Joe Rogan, for example, takes TRT, very similar drug to what trans men take. estradiol is used to treat menopause sometimes.
Talking about minors specifically, I don't think that they have the cognitive ability to consent to long-term decisions. Studies show that 90% will end up desisting by the age of 20. We know what puberty blockers, for example, what they do for precocious puberty, but they've never been studied and they're not FDA approved. They're prescribed off-label for people in key growth years and adolescence. Starting somebody on puberty blockers and then going straight to cross-sex hormones, and every time they're never able to fully, achieve orgasm as an adult. You have to do the studies, you have to put a pause button on it. Otherwise, what we're doing is literally experimenting on children.
Yes, love her, love everything she says. So again, they were used on kids who are 6 years old who develop puberty too soon. That's not the same as stunting someone's puberty and them never going through it. Not the same. If you want to put some kids in a research study and the parents decide, let my kid be a guinea pig, I don't see any better option than that. I still disagree with it, but it's better than just having all of these children part of this medical experiment.
Wallace Wong is an unscrupulous medical professional in British Columbia, and he is part of the whole profit regime. They are rushing kids into these procedures. I know this because a father found out that his daughter was being transitioned without knowledge or permission. And when he was telling the public about it, he went to jail. That's what Canada does. So it's not just about big pharma making big money. It's about taking advantage of children that have serious problems.
Yeah, I've heard of that. It was on What is a Woman? And they played some of the voicemails about it, so it's so sad that happened. Crazy.
What's going on with Canada?
I don't necessarily believe that anybody's pushing anybody to be trans. Like when you're like, leave the kids alone, it's like, look at how you talk about trans people. Who would want to be trans in that sense? Like who would want to be pushing somebody into that lifestyle to be treated?
It is happening.
It is. There are so many kids who are gay and their parents don't accept it and they've detransitioned and they've said, I think my parents would have preferred to have a trans heterosexual kid than a gay kid. So absolutely. And I don't know if these doctors are kind of seeing it in the same way as like, ooh,
let's make loads of kids trans.
But there are gender affirming therapists who come from an ideological position. There are religious people who come from an ideological position and they enjoy bestowing their virtues of their religion onto kids because they think this is going to improve their lives, it's going to enrich their lives and their experience. And that's what these gender affirming therapists think. They think, well, if a child expresses anything to me, I'm going to create a safe space and improve their life by affirming it. So they may not be conspiring to say, okay, we need to hit our quota of how many trans kids we transition this month, but they're coming from an ideological point of view and it still has the same effect.
Which side do you guys resonate with most?
Moment of truth. Oh my God. Yes, go on.
So I actually want to pick up right where we left off.
Evelyn,
How old
what
are you?
happened?
17.
Have you gone through different phases throughout your life?
When I was 3 and 4, I really wanted to be famous. I wanted to be a movie star. I wanted to be a singer. 6 to 7, I wanted to rule the world, actually, quite literally. I thought I'd do a great job. I thought I knew everything. Basically,
okay, Evelyn,
like 12,
can we get on with it, please?
I think
We don't need a
13
life
maybe.
story.
Basically, up to 15, I was really into the idea of becoming an endocrinologist because of the awesome endocrinologist I had.
Endocrinologist, she could be transitioning
when I
kids.
was 16, so this would have been last year, kind of realized after failing chemistry that maybe medicine was not for me. Now I'm kind of focused on getting into international relations and politics.
You went through different, 4 to 5 different stages, but you're kind of like on the liberal side at the moment. Can you explain why you decided to step on this stage?
There's certain age groups that probably should not be making life-altering decisions, like 3 to 4-year-olds, absolutely not. Parents do need to be involved with that, just because parents do oftentimes have their children's best interests at heart, even if at times to the public or to the child it seems unfair.
Well, of course most parents do, but when they're being told by a doctor that your kid will kill themselves if you don't transition them, then what are they going to do? And this girl, Evelyn's let me down, everyone. I take it back, not as intelligent as I thought, but she's just described a life where she's changed her mind every year up until last year. And she's like, I think kids can make life-altering decisions. 4905.
What made you guys go to the conservative side?
We're talking about people who still believe in make-believes. I just don't think they understand the gravity of the situation.
I would push back a little, 15, 16, I would say high school range. I think we should probably give them a little bit more credit. The reason I'm here is because I just agree fundamentally with the idea making life-altering choices. I don't think You know, anyone under the age of 18, I guess maybe might be arbitrary, but you know, in that minor range, as we've defined it in this country, that's a medical transition, or even something like, you know, what school you go to, like what college. I mean, you know, minors make decisions like that all the time, but most of the time, and I would hope, usually they're not, you know, completely on their own. You know, we have support systems, and I think what's really important is that we extend those support systems, so like counseling and, you know, people at schools and, you know, educating parents so that students aren't going into decisions completely on their own.
Yes, respect what he said. Can 16 and 17-year-olds? I don't think so. When I was 17, I elected to have a surgery on my nose, and I regret doing that. And when I was that age, I was just like, yeah, let's do it. It'll be good. And I got septicemia. I was in hospital for 2 weeks. It was awful. I now have chronic facial pain. I don't know if it's related, but I was too young to make that decision by myself. And, you know, at the very least, give them counseling, give them therapy till they're 18, get them to 18, keep them alive if these guys want to say that so many of them will kill themselves. But I'm dubious whether the age should even be 21, you know? Like Blair White says when she started transitioning when she was 20, and she didn't understand the gravity of wanting to freeze her sperm and be able to still have kids. So I'm not sure about that one. I think let adults be adults, but you know, if the age of consent to be able to drink in America is 21, then at the very least, transitioning should be 18.
Minors should be allowed to medically transition.
Absolutely not. That has not changed for me. We're
Arthur.
talking about mental health issues, and there are a whole host of problems that children deal with when they're struggling with identity or gender dysphoria. Let's treat those issues. Let's treat those causes. I have mentioned numerous cases of former trans kids who were pushed into it, parents who tried to protect their kids and were punished for doing so. This is a very fraught affair. These are irreversible, damaging procedures, and we have so many detransitioners that are coming out warning the next generation not to do this.
I think it's worth mentioning that the detransitioners, while I do sympathize with them, and I think it's unfortunate that the medical system has failed them, they're a statistical anomaly in the grand scheme of how many people have transitioned medically and surgically.
Even if they were a statistical anomaly, it's still complete malfeasance to say, well, we should just let them all transition because there's a few percent that regret it, but you know, we're going to accept that as our opportunity cost. It's a sunk cost fallacy. So we're going to offer all these people one thing, and then there's going to be all these people harmed, but we don't care. It's terrible. If you let the rest grow up till they're 18, they can still transition. They're not sterilized for life. They're not missing breasts. They can still then go through all those procedures.
We don't know that though. So the issue is we don't know what the detransition rate really is, simply because they're falling off the rules. If you don't have your primary sex organs removed, then you can literally stop taking hormones and nobody's following up on them. Also, we also know that the longest study out is the 5-year study, and the average detransition takes place 4 to 10 years after. And so those people are not being counted in those studies. I think that we should be working on mental health coverage. We should be getting them to an age of adulthood. We shouldn't be mutilating them at a young age. Like, your prefrontal cortex is where you make impulse decision making. And so that's what develops last. And so we should be getting them there. I think we can look at social transition. Social transition might not be a zero-sum game because we see that it kind of generally leads to transition. But let them socially transition, get them to adulthood, and then see where we're at.
Just gotta say, love her, agree with everything. Facts, facts, facts.
I agree. Let them socially transition, use hormone blockers, start cross hormones at an appropriate age when the body is ready to be receiving cross hormones later on. Surgery doesn't have to happen before 18 if they are already being treated with cross hormones or hormone blockers, and we can wait until they're 18 if we are helping them and affirming their gender.
So she says, I don't want them to take these medications so their body is able to take them at 16. Tammy.
I would just say ultimately those who are promoting this and those who are accepting it will be accountable. We're seeing a lot of different lawsuits coming out. Detransitioner who is now suing Kaiser Permanente. He, I don't even know what gender they are, but they felt like they were into this. They were tricked. They were kind of ran into that system, and now they're suing. And you're going to see a lot of rise of these lawsuits. And children are too young to transition. They can't fully grasp this concept. And then also, it's just not true. And so we shouldn't be pushing it for kids. And I think the solution to this is accepting who you actually are, a Christian, seeking the gospel, we're made in God's image and likeness, and so allowing God to speak into that through prayer and sacraments.
No. You kind of ruin your argument when you then bring in the Christianity and stuff, because you're against an ideological point of view of gender identity. Do not combat that with another ideological view. I remember in another debate, one girl said, we're in the right body, men are men, women are women, it's not supposed to change. And then someone said, according to who? And then she said,
God.
No, honey, I respect that you believe in God, but you're never going to win a debate by talking to non-religious people and saying, I don't agree with one ideology because I agree with this ideology. It's not helpful. So he said all the right things, and then he was like, I'm a Christian. No.
I get the argument of, you're not developed until you're 25, but if that's the case, then people shouldn't be experiencing anxiety and so on at 26, if that's going to be like the main point of argument. Like, I started paying bills and working at 15, 16, put myself through school. I bought my first car, 16, but my second car, my third car, all on my own, and I wish somebody at that time had looked at me and told me that I wasn't allowed to be making specific decisions for myself, because I think that's on a person-to-person basis, and I completely agree with you that if they're at that time they're ready for that, then they're ready for it, and if they're not, they're not.
So they're not ready for it. They're not ready for it. They are children. And he just said, well, if your prefrontal cortex doesn't develop till you're 5, then why are people 26 and above experiencing anxiety? So it doesn't mean that once your prefrontal cortex is developed that you are just
perfect,
that you're not fully capable of making decisions that are long-term, or perhaps you are still figuring out a lot in terms of your values and who you are. It's not the same thing as saying that you have now a perfect state of mental health. And also, it's unfortunate that he had to go through that at 16, but he shouldn't have had to make those decisions.
Oh, now let's see the final decision from the undecided group. What's your final decision?
Oh, come on, kids. Please. No. Oh.
So let's start out with what made you go to the liberal side.
I think that you made some really good points about being able to start puberty blockers and socially transition. And surgeries do not need to happen before 18.
How can you decide to block your puberty when you've never been through puberty? How can you decide to never have an orgasm when you've never had an orgasm? No one knows what an orgasm feels like till you have one.
And it's great.
It's pretty good. So, doesn't agree with kids making life-altering decisions. Puberty blockers are life-altering. Cross-sex hormones are life-altering. A girl will have a permanently deepened voice, an Adam's apple, facial hair, may lose their hair. Kiara is back in my bad books, everyone.
Because what if they don't make it to 25? What if they're not still alive to transition at 25 when they're fully developed? So I just don't, sorry. And I seen my cousin that I mentioned, I can't imagine my life without them. And if they were not, if they're not able to transition.
Coming from personal motivation, don't feel sorry for the tears. Next.
I think for me, what made me come to the conservative side is I definitely think that social transitioning is acceptable. I think of the case of Angelina Jolie's daughter, who went through a long phase of, I guess, we were not entirely sure if it was gender dysphoria or not, but wanted to present as male, and then came to an age when they did decide that that was something they no longer wanted to do. And so I really respect that opinion, and I am also concerned about that. I really genuinely. We also, if we're not entirely sure what the medical transitioning has long-term effects, or the medicine itself on brain development and all that stuff, I think we should just be very wary of letting children transition even.
Gotta say, Evelyn, you're back in the good books. Keep switching. Very valid points, very eloquent, and similar to me, I can really empathize with kids going through it, and they should be given all the support possible that does not consist of puberty blockers, hormones, or surgeries. But life is not fair. Some of us deal with shitty things, and we don't experiment on kids for that reason. There are other means, and just like she said, some kids grow out of gender dysphoria. So if that's the case, how can we make these decisions?
Still lean very much towards the middle, but I think if I had to pick, I lean right now a little bit more on the conservative side. And I think the point you made about how we just don't know really the detransition rate. Transitioning as a process, medical transition, also social transition, and you're absolutely right, in 10 years from now, you know, someone's experience might not be the exact same. I'm not saying that that's the case for everyone. I'm saying that that's probably still not even the majority of people, but I do think it's still a significant amount to take into consideration. There's still a lot that maybe we just don't fully understand, and I think until we get to that point, I'll just err on the side of caution.
Woo! Okay, that's it, everyone. I did not expect to be doing this on holiday, but it was super fun. I have to admit, I got pretty frustrated in that. I don't really think, well, first of all, we won! Team No Kids Transition wins 2 against 1. I really like this idea. I think they could have found, once again, Jubilee is like a liberal, progressive organization, and they keep apparently just finding liberals off the street who don't know shit, and all they can talk about is their own experience. We had 2 trans people, one mother of 2 trans kids, and every question they brought it back to my experience, my experience. Jubilee.
Find better liberals.
And then find conservatives who are not homophobic, transphobic, and Christian. Sarah, best person on this whole panel. She's trans, didn't bring in her own experiences, talked about facts, talked about statistics, talked about what we don't know yet. The other guys made a lot of valid points. The guy in the middle was better. Arthur, don't have time for him. I think he was kind of unnecessarily offensive. Then when it comes to the undeciders, I overall was very impressed with them. I would not have been able to speak that way when I was their age. They knew a lot, they'd done research themselves. I do think that across the board, their decisions seem to be inconsistent and contradict each other. Yeah, but I think maybe part of that is just because the more they listened to the prompts, the more they kind of learned. So I really enjoy this idea. I'm really glad that the Conservatives won on this one. And I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think. Which prompts did you agree or disagree with? Are you on the conservative side or the liberal side? Let me know why. Please follow me on TikTok and Twitter, and I will see you in the next video.